I'm going to make an attempt to explain to you guys what modern art is, what postmodern art is, and teach you why Cindy Sherman, pictured right here, is one of the most influential living artists. But in order for us to make our own Cindy Sherman artworks or understand Cindy Sherman more, we have to learn a little bit about postmodernism. And in order to understand what postmodernism means, we need to learn what modernism is first. Now, I'm not going to read any notes. I'm just going to shoot from the hip here, and I'm going to try my best, because people literally, like write PhD dissertations on what postmodern art is. And honestly, that's kind of boring. But postmodern art is not boring, and neither is modernism for that matter. It can be a little bit boring, whatever. But Cindy Sherman's artwork's really cool, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun learning about her today. Cindy Sherman is a artist. She takes self-portraits. So I call her the original selfie artist. Now, you could look in the picture below. That is Cindy Sherman. This is a self-portrait. We have to understand something here. When we think of a selfie, we think of, like holding our selfie stick up, or, we're at Niagara Falls and, we're posing, with our best friend and our Tommy Hilfiger jeans. But I need you to understand something about Cindy Sherman's self-portraits. They are well composed, okay? And if you remember, composition, it's a fancy word for, rearranging things on the paper. Now, these are photographs, so when we compose them, we have to think a little bit differently, okay? Camera angle, subject, where is the subject in the photograph? What's in the background? What is the subject wearing? These are all the things that make Cindy Sherman's artwork. Cindy Sherman's artworks are often untitled, which we're going to get into that a little bit later in this video about why that's significant. But let's say, for example, the powerful Mr. Myers wasn't here to explain to you Cindy Sherman's artwork. Let's look at this photograph for a second. Looking at this photograph, it looks like it was taken from a movie, okay? Our fancy art word that we're going to learn is still. A still looks like a single frame taken from a movie. So ask yourself for a second, looking at this photograph, what kind of movie does this look like it was taken from? And what kind of character is Cindy Sherman playing? Okay, so you maybe thought that she's a young girl alone in a big city. Maybe she's starting her career, right? All of these things that we think about this photograph comes from our own ideas and kind of our own cultural disposition, right? Like, we've seen movies before, okay? We know the plot lines. We've seen so many movies that are kind of the same, and we've seen camera angles and photographs, stills like this in the movies we've seen. So we're already like reaching into our heads and coming up with our own stories. Well, Cindy Sherman wants us to do that, okay? And when we do that, we engage with this postmodern idea of the gaze, okay? So gaze means to like intensely look at or maybe even stare at something. In postmodern art, when we're talking about gaze, we're talking about what the viewer, meaning you or I, brings to the artwork as we look at it. And if we're really getting out there and we're really thinking big, we think of gaze as the cultural, political things in our lives that dictate the way that we see or change the way that we see. What if we lived in a culture where, a woman wasn't supposed to be by herself in the city, walking around? Our ideas of this photograph would be totally different. Or let's say we lived in a society where you didn't really watch movies. Our ideas of this photograph would be totally different. So gaze is this postmodern idea that in a way you kind of change the artwork because you're engaged in it by looking at it. In a way, the blank canvas isn't a piece of paper or a canvas board or something at this point. It's Cindy Sherman. It's the woman and her body, and she changes the way that she looks to change the artwork. So again, our gaze, the way we look at this photograph, is going to change all of our ideas we have about this person. So this is one of Cindy Sherman's most famous photographs, okay? This was taken in 1981. Again, it's untitled, which means she's not giving us any hints. All the hints come from the photograph itself. So to me, this photograph looks like a scene from a horror movie, okay? She's like, looks like she fell down, looks like she might be kind of like wet and sweaty from running from somebody. She's looking up, she looks scared. The lighting in it is like a dark blue, and the setting where the space that she's occupying, her hands are on what looks to me like a floor of like a porch that could be in like a scary cabin in the woods or something like that. And she's got, the classic, like teenage schoolgirl outfit, all she wanted to do was like, go to her friend's house, and then, some, crazy horror movie shenanigans started happening. So this photograph, I can't remember exactly how much it sold for, but it was like $3 million or something crazy. Okay. So, hey, if you want to make $3 million, maybe start taking selfies. I don't know. It worked for Kim Kardashian too, right? To me, this looks like the sequel to Tiger King, right? This is Betsy Warheimer, and she is the Dachshund Queen of Alabama. She's got over 500 prize-winning wiener dogs. Before we talk about what postmodern is, and we're going to use Cindy Sherman as a gateway to understand postmodernism, we need to talk about what modernism is, okay? Because postmodern means after modern. Whenever you hear the term modern art, it's often used incorrectly. People often use the term modern art for like art that was just made yesterday that they saw at the Albright Knox Art Gallery. It's not really the case. When we talk about modern art, we're talking about a time in the 20th century, to me, is most exemplified in like the 50s and 60s. The art of the time was abstract expressionism, okay? If you don't know what abstract expressionism is, it's usually that artwork that you look at and you tell yourself, I could make that by myself, okay? And the ultimate abstract expressionist is Jackson Pollock. Basically, a bunch of white guys got together and they were in America, and they created this totally new painting style, okay? That for the time really didn't look like what people were making in Europe, and didn't have all these old world ideas about what painting should be. It's not figurative. It's not pictures of people, okay? It's basically shapes and color. And with abstract expressionists, we're usually thinking about movement, or these paintings are so big and large, they kind of make you like feel something, okay? Their attempt was to create artwork that didn't have people in it. It didn't have letters or writing. It was completely devoid. It didn't have any symbols or anything that would make you think about a particular culture. After World War II, people were really interested in making artwork that you couldn't look at and say, well, that's German art, or that's American, or whatever. It was just free of anything cultural. When postmodernism came along, postmodern art basically explores the idea that you can never make artwork that isn't rooted in your culture or your own ideas. Cindy Sherman creates these untitled photographs, okay? Without even making any effort, and without me explaining to you what her artwork is about, as soon as you look at these photographs, you immediately start making judgments. You start you have your own ideas about what the art is. You can't help it. You bring that with you, okay? It's like part of the gaze. It's part of the human experience. You look at something, you're like, that is a picture of a woman. She's in a city. It looks like it's from a movie. It's automatic. Modern art tried to totally do away with that. In our culture, one of the greatest things America makes is movies, right? We all watch Netflix. We all watched, most of us watch Netflix and, stuff like that. So we bring to the table our own culture, our own stories, our own ideas when we view artwork. So at its heart, postmodernism says you cannot create artwork that isn't rooted in some type of culture or experience. I like to use this painting as an example of postmodernism, or at least the question or the idea that postmodernism is wrestling with every time they make a statement or make a work of art. What is this a picture of? You probably said a pipe. Now, below this painting of a pipe, Rene Magritte wrote, "This is not a pipe." He's not wrong. He created a fake pipe, a facsimile of a pipe, like it's like a pipe illusion, right? There's not an actual physical pipe there. It's a painting of a pipe. So in one work of art, you are experiencing what you tell yourself is a pipe. But the artist is telling you, hey, look, this isn't a pipe. In reality, it's just a bunch of thin oil paint spread across a canvas, rearranged in a way to look like a pipe. But it's not actually a pipe. So in one shot, in one painting, you bring your experience to it. You bring your culture, you bring your ideas, and you say, that's a pipe. But the artist is telling you, look, this isn't a pipe. Just like Cindy Sherman's artwork. Your mind says this is a movie. That's a young girl in the city. Cindy Sherman saying, I'm not a young girl in the city. This isn't from a movie. I'm not a reality show star. You are creating that narrative. You're creating that story because of what you bring culturally to this art viewing experience.